On a cold Monday morning in Davenport, Iowa, in 1968, 40 boys stood in a line along the wall while the dean of boys, Harlan Stroud, came down it one at a time. He checked them the way a sergeant checks a barracks, hair up off the collar and clear of the ears, no curl hanging down the forehead, collar buttoned, shirt tail tucked, nails clean, shoes wiped down. He ran the back of his hand once up the side of a boy's jaw, feeling for the one who had skipped the razor. One boy had let his hair come down over his ears that fall, and Stroud sent him home to fix it, the same way he had been sending boys home for 15 years. I was in that line. By the time I had a nephew in the same building, the line was gone. Between 1969 and 1971, a string of federal courts looked at codes exactly like Stroud's, the washed and combed hair off the collar, the clean-shaven jaw, the short sideburns, and ruled that a school had no business telling a boy how to wear his hair. The codes came down across the country in those years, and the first thing a boy used to carry into a room, the thing that made a stranger sit up a little before he had said one word, came down with them. Under all the fuss about hair and collars, these rules were quietly handing a boy the first impression itself. A man groomed to that standard walked into a bank, a hiring hall, a strange front parlor, and got met as somebody before he opened his mouth, having borrowed nothing and proved nothing yet. Not charm, a head start. Some of this you can put on tomorrow. Number 29, the one the courts win at first, is the cheapest respect a man ever bought himself. Number 14 is the one that made waiters and elevator men remember a man warmly for years. And number 1, the one the schools never taught and no court could kill, is the single thing the rest were only ever a way of doing. I will hold that one back to the end. Number 30, the clean shave. Every morning, before the light was even up, Stroud felt for it with the back of his hand, and the court struck it off the books by 1970. A working man scraped a cold razor over his jaw at 5 in the morning, when the only soul who would see him before noon was a foreman who did not care either way. He did it anyway. A smooth jaw was the first thing a stranger read off a man, ahead of the clothes, ahead of anything he said. Number 29, the haircut, kept short and combed back off the face, freshened every couple of weeks whether it strictly needed it or not. This is the one the courts went after first. The school code in a Wisconsin town that a federal judge threw out in 1969 said it about as plain as it could be said, hair washed and combed and up off the collar, clear of the ears, and the boys clean shaven. A barber on the main street of every town kept a chair full of men who came in on a schedule, not a whim. 15 minutes, a hot towel laid across the neck, and a man walked back onto the sidewalk looking like somebody who had a grip on his own life. The hair grew the same on every head in the country. What it told people about a man lived entirely in whether he tended it. Number 28, the shirt pressed, the collar buttoned to the throat, the tail tucked and kept that way through the day. Those dress rules went down by 1971, struck off the books right alongside the hair. A grandfather of mine took the iron to his own work shirts on a Sunday night, and I did not understand it until I was a good deal older. A pressed shirt on a man who spent his days in a ditch was a notice pinned on first thing in the morning that he had decided the day was worth dressing for before the day had given him a single reason to. Number 27, he found your eyes the moment he reached you and held them while he said hello. I worked alongside 2 men the same year. One looked you square in the face when he came up. The other looked at your shirt button or past your shoulder the whole time he talked. Same trade, same wages, same town, but you trusted the first man inside a second, and you never quite settled with the second one, and not one hand on that floor could have told you why if you had asked him. Number 26, he gave you his own name first, clear and unhurried, before you had to fish for it. Not run together, so you spent the next 10 minutes afraid to use it because you had not caught it. He said it the way a man says a thing he is not ashamed of, and left a beat of room after it for you to give yours back. Number 25, he got the grease off his hands and the dirt from under his nails before he went anywhere a person would see him. The men in my family worked in a foundry, and their hands looked it, but there was a stiff brush and a bar of pumice soap on the sink, and before church or a visit or the bank, a man stood there and worked at them until they were a working man's hands and not a dirty man's hands. The dirt was honest. Leaving it on for the world to look at was a carelessness, and carelessness was the one thing a man with nothing could not afford to show. Number 24. He carried a clean handkerchief, pressed and folded, and he carried it for other people. A woman crying at a graveside, a child with a bloody knee, a man sweating through a hard afternoon, and there it was, out of his pocket and into the hand that needed it. He spent half a lifetime carrying a small square of cloth he himself almost never used. Number 23. He kept his one good hat brushed and blocked and hung on a hook by the door. A man owned one decent hat and it had to last him years, so he ran a brush around the felt and kept the crown shaped. The hat was half his height to a stranger coming up the street, and a cared-for one on a poor man said more for him than a careless one on a rich man. What follows cost a man nothing, which is very near the reason almost nobody bothers with it now. Number 22. Ask him a straight question and you got a straight answer before he gave you the reasons. Yes or no first, and then the explaining if explaining was owed. You did not have to pan a sentence of real gold out of a river of maybes, and it depends how you look at it. Number 21. When he paid you a compliment, he named the exact thing so you knew he meant it. Not nice work, which costs nothing and means nothing. He would say that was a clean weld on the underside where nobody was going to look. An uncle of mine gave me one like that the first year I was out on my own, said I had laid a brick course straighter than the man who taught me, and I am an old man now and I still have it set away somewhere. A man who names the thing has actually looked at you. Let me step off the list a minute because I owe the other side of this its due. The boys who grew their hair out and dragged those grooming codes into court were not all of them just looking for trouble. A good deal of what got enforced in those lines was small, and some of it was flat out mean. A boy could be shamed over a cowlick he could not tame with a bucket of water, or a second-hand collar that would not sit right, and there were men running those lines who used the code less to build a boy up than to break the few they had taken a dislike to. The kids were right that a school does not own your scalp. I have never once thought they were wrong about that part. But nobody weighed the other side of it when the codes came down. That same drill that could turn cruel was also the only place a great many boys were ever told by anybody that how they carried themselves in front of other people was going to matter to their whole lives. We struck the cruelty, which was right, and we struck the lesson along with it, which nobody meant to do, and we put nothing at all back in the empty space. A boy now grows up with not one person ever telling him that the world is going to read him in the first 3 seconds, whether he has agreed to it or not. Number 20. He did not come to a man's house with empty hands. A jar of something, a bag of nails he had doubled up on, a few tomatoes off his own row. It did not matter what it was or that nobody expected it. You did not cross another family's doorstep carrying nothing but yourself. The next one was close to a religion with the men I came up around. Number 19. When he borrowed a thing, he brought it back in better shape than it left in, and the man who showed me what that meant was a neighbor named Bill Cosgrove. He borrowed my father's good handsaw one August to take down a dead elm. He brought it back a week later sharpened, the teeth set fresh, the handle rubbed with oil, sharper than it had ever been kept in our house. My father went to thank him, and Cosgrove waved it off like it was nothing, like of course you return a man's tool better than you got it. What kind of animal does otherwise? After that, my father would have handed Bill Cosgrove the keys to the house. A borrowed thing was a small test a man passed or failed in private, and the men were always watching to see which you did, because how a man treated a tool nobody was guarding told them how he would treat everything they could not watch. Number 18. When you did him a kindness, he wrote it down by hand and put it in the mail. Not a word dashed off in the time it takes to feel relieved you remembered. A few lines on a card in his own slow hand that you read twice and stood in the kitchen a minute over. What is a thank you even worth when it cost the man nothing to give it? Number 17. He dressed up to meet the weight of a day. The bank, the funeral, the courtroom, the morning he had to go ask another man for work or for mercy. He put on the good shirt and the pressed trousers and the shine shoes, and he did it precisely on the days he had the least. A poor man at a banker's desk in his one good suit was not fooling anybody into thinking he was rich. It was never about looking like money. It was about showing the room he understood the size of the moment and had come to it with respect. Number 16. When a funeral passed in the street, he stopped where he stood and took off his hat, even for a stranger he had never once laid eyes on. I watched my grandfather do it on a sidewalk in the rain when I was a boy, a hearse and a slow line of cars for somebody neither of us knew, and he stopped and took the hat off his wet head and held it against his chest until the last car had gone by. I asked him who it was. He said it did not matter who it was. It took me 40 years to understand the size of that answer. The next one, a man did so quietly, the other person usually never caught him at it. Number 15. Out walking with a woman, he took the street side without a word and without seeming to think about it, so that whatever came off the road, the mud, the spray, the runaway, came at him and not at her. She often did not even notice it was happening. Number 14. He knew the names of the men who served him, and he used them. The waiter, the fellow who ran the elevator up and down all day, the kid sweeping the barbershop floor, he had their names and asked after them and remembered what they had told him last time. There was a porter named Eldridge on a train my father rode for work, and my father had his name, his wife's name, which of his children was sickly. When my father came through that car, Eldridge lit up like the man was family, and saw to it that my father, who rode the cheap seats, somehow always ended up comfortable. Most men of any standing looked clean through a man like that, the way you look through a lamppost. The few who did not, who gave a serving man his name, got a loyalty out of that whole invisible army that money never could. And here is the part that ought to shame the rest of us. It was the same trouble to learn the name as not to. They simply thought the man on the other end of the service was a man. In 1968, a school could send a boy home to shave and get his hair cut, and the law stood squarely behind the school. By 1971, across a great deal of the country, it could not. In between sat a row of federal court cases that almost nobody outside a law library has ever heard of. In one of them, Breen against Kahl, a judge in Wisconsin in 1969, struck down a grooming code that read almost word for word like the one Harlan Stroud ran in my school: the washed and combed hair off the collar, the clean-shaven jaw, the sideburns kept short. Court after court went the same way, a few went the other, and the Supreme Court kept its hands off the question and let the split stand. The schools, no longer sure what they were even allowed to enforce, mostly quit enforcing any of it and sit with what that means. Those judges were ruling on hair, on whether a boy's own hair was his own business, and as a question about hair, they likely had it right. Nobody in those courtrooms was arguing about whether a boy ought to be taught to carry himself into a room squared away. But the grooming line was where a boy got taught that, by accident, riding along with the hair and the collar, and when the line shut for good, the teaching rode out the door with it, and not one court in the country ever noticed there had been anything else in the room to lose. If any of this is striking something in you, follow along, so that the next man who feels the lack of it and goes looking for what it was finds it named and kept here instead of gone for good with the last of the men who had it. I put one of these out every week. Number 13. He kept himself up on his own time, not only when the job or the public was watching. Sunday morning, no work and nowhere to be, and he was still shaved and combed and in a clean shirt, sitting with his coffee. Nobody was coming. That was the whole point of it. Number 12. He brought his voice down the instant he stepped into a sick room or a church, before anyone had to hush him. A loud man in a quiet place announces that he has not yet noticed anyone in the world but himself. These men notice the room first and arrange themselves to it. There is a softness that comes over a hard man when he stands at the foot of a sickbed with his voice gone low, and the people there never forget that they saw it. What comes next a man could not fake, because it showed up in everything he owned. Number 11. He mended what he had instead of pitching it, and what he kept looking cared for. The resoled boots, the chair re-glued, the coat with the turned collar, the knife handle wrapped where it had cracked. A man could own almost nothing and still have not one shabby thing in the house, because every object in it had been kept up by his own two hands. You felt it the moment you walked in, the difference between a poor house and a neglected one, even if you would not have had the words for what you were feeling. Number 10. He pulled out the chair, held the door, and saw the others settled before he sat down himself. He came to the table last, after he had seen to the people he came in with. Number 9. He stripped his work gloves off before he took your hand, A small thing, gone now along with the gloves themselves. A bare hand offered to another man said there was nothing between the two of you, no leather, no hurry. Here is my actual hand. Number 8. He smelled of soap and maybe a little plain hair tonic, and never of the day he had put in. A man who handled grease or tar all day, and who you would never have guessed it from, has stopped at a cold tap before he came near you. A foreman I worked under kept a cake of green soap by the door and used it before he would sit at his own supper table. Coming to people carrying the smell of your labor was a way of making them share it, and he would not do that to a soul. Number 7. He greeted the children in a room too, not only the grown people. He would come into a house and crouch down and say a serious hello to the boy on the floor, by name, ask him a real question and wait on a real answer, before he ever stood up and turned to the adults. The other men talked over the kids' heads like they were furniture. That child would remember being treated like a person by that man for the rest of his natural life. The one after this took more out of a man than it looks like it should. Number 6. He left his bad day at the door and came in with a level face. The men carried plenty money that would not stretch, a back that was going, a marriage gone quiet, but they had the trick of setting it down on the step so it did not come into the room and sit on everybody else. You greet people with the face you have decided to give them, not the one the day handed you. Number 5. He kept the appointed hour exactly. If he said he would be by at 7, he was on the step at 7, not half past, not a quarter to with you still in your undershirt. Number 4. He looked the part a good while before he had the part. A young man with something in mind kept himself, dressed himself, carried himself like the man he intended to become and not the one the world currently took him for. Nothing borrowed, nothing pretended, just held to the standard of the future before the future had shown up. A foreman on my second crew told me he watched the young men's shoes more than their work because the kid who kept his shoes decent on $1 an hour wage was already living like the man he was trying to be, and that was the one he moved up first. Number 3. He offered his arm to an older person on the ice or up a bad set of stairs before it could become a thing anybody had to ask for. Not a fuss, not a production of being helpful. The elbow just quietly there. At the moment the steps got slick, so that an old woman who would have died before admitting she needed it could take it as though the two of them were merely walking together. The best help left the other person their dignity fully intact, and these men knew it by feel. Number 2. This is the one the men guarded most carefully, and it is the strangest of all to put into words, because at the root of it there was no trick to perform at all. He treated you as worth his best from the very first second, before you had done one thing to earn it. The clean hands, the caught name, the full attention, the good shirt, all of it was him deciding, on sight, that you were a person worth taking trouble over, and almost nobody alive can hold out against that for long. A man who has plainly decided you matter, before you have shown him a single reason to think so, puts a thing in your hands you cannot quite give back, the suspicion that maybe you do matter, that this careful fellow has caught sight of something in you that you had stopped being sure was there. You do not forget the man who did that. You will cross a town for him 30 years later. He gave you yourself back at full value, on credit, the moment you met, and a gift like that buys a loyalty nothing else on this earth can touch. Number 1. The schools never taught this one, and no court ever struck it down, because it never lived in the hair or the collar or the shined shoe. It was the thing standing underneath every one of those. Every rule on this whole list was a trouble taken. The cold razor before dawn, the iron on the Sunday shirt, the 2-week haircut, the name caught and used, the chair pulled out, the bad day left at the door. Each one was a small trouble a man went to before he ever reached you. And that, in the end, is the whole of what a stranger reads off you in the first few seconds. He cannot see your money, and he has no way yet to know your character, but he reads instantly and without ever deciding to whether you went to any trouble. A man who has plainly taken trouble over his own person and over your comfort both cannot easily be met with contempt, because the trouble itself is a kind of respect paid in advance, and respect paid first is very near the only respect that ever comes back to you on sight. It was the first thing a boy was shown and the last thing an old man set down. He bothered, about himself and about you. The joke of it is that it was never any kind of secret at all. It was handed down the better part of 100 years without a single book ever written on it, from the men to the boys, in barracks and barber shops and grooming lines, and on the edge of a bed on a Sunday night with a tin of polish open. It took one ruling about hair and the 10 quiet years that came after it to set the whole thing down in the road and walk off from it. The men who still carry any of it are in their 80s now, scraping a careful jaw every morning for a world that quit checking a long time ago. Nobody is going to teach the boys coming up what those men were taught, because the rooms where it passed from the one to the next are closed, and the men themselves would be puzzled to hear you call it anything grander than ordinary decency. But it was only ever 100 small troubles, each one taken on purpose, one man showing the next how. It went out of the world inside a single generation. And a thing that left in one generation is exactly the kind of thing a single generation could decide some cold morning at the mirror, razor in hand, for no one's sake but the next stranger who has not walked in yet, to quietly pick back up